Nice one, thanks. Let's come to one of the big questions I still have on my inner list, and that is a question that has, been traveling with me for a long time now, because I'm always searching for new answers to that. And it's, how would you say, does change happen? How does change happen within people? What's the difference between somebody who changes and somebody who doesn't? Through what stages do people have to go through, and how do you lead them? That's the question. How does change happen?
Okay, I have a very simple view of this. I've got lots of different influences from lots of different places. One of the big influences on me is a guy called Robert Kegan. Jürgen Rasmussen introduced me to Robert Kegan originally, and Robert Kegan is an adult developmental psychologist. He's interested in how adults develop, learn, change, and grow. Now, he's a big influence on me, and I don't want to get big into Kegan's theory here, but it's driven by the idea that as we grow, as we change, and as we mature as adults, one of the key things we develop the ability to do is we get better at perspective taking. We get the ability to disembed from our perspectives and take a perspective upon our perspectives. Now, I think this is...
Could you put that into a bit simpler terms?
Okay, all right.
Is it so everybody gets it, including me?
Let's imagine, for example, somebody is having an experience and they're going, "Oh, this is awful, this is terrible, why do these things always go wrong for me?" They're caught up in a certain reality.
Yeah.
Now, when they're inside of that reality, when they're embedded in it, and maybe they're feeling fear and anxiety, when they're inside of it, they are being had by the fear and the anxiety, and it looks like life really is terrible and bad things always happen to them. That reality they are in, that perspective, that reality tunnel, just is true for them. And it wouldn't even occur to them to reflect upon it, to take a meta-position on it.
Yeah.
But at some point, people develop the ability to go, hang on a second, is this really what's happening? Or what is that? And to be able to point to that fear and go, oh, that's that fear that's happening. Actually, maybe life isn't terrible. Maybe it's just that my experience of it isn't very useful. I'm thinking about it in not a very useful way, if you see what I mean. What else could be going on here? Is there something else that could be true here? I.e., is there a different perspective I could take? Now, I'm not saying that people do this consciously, but they have less of a tendency as they mature to be had by their perspectives. Or you could say, get caught up in particular hypnotic loops. They can disembed from the hypnotic loop they're in and look at it and go, oh, look, I've bbeen running that loop, and look how it's built. Now,
that's a nice way of looking at it. The reason why I asked for going into it in detail is because, of course, we all know that looking at something as having a perspective on it and taking a different perspective, but a thought of having a different perspective on your perspective. I think that's a nice way of thinking about it.
I call this de-hypnosis.
Yeah.
And I've got a little yin-yang up on my Hypnosis Without Trance Facebook page, and in the yin-yang it's got on one side hypnosis and on the other side de-hypnosis. Because I think when I'm doing change work with people, as much as anything, I'm helping them disembed from the hypnotic loops that they've been running in their everyday lives, that have been having them. And they can disembed from them and go, oh, look, that's what's been running. And then they can bring their critical faculty to bear upon them, but only when they disembed from them, only when they're popped out the loop and they can look at it and see how it's structured.
So part one in how does change happen for you is pop out of the old loop.
In a way, I think that's necessary. Now, there's a guy called James Pennebaker who is a clinical psychologist. He wrote a book called The Secret Life of Pronouns. Now, James Pennebaker originally got into the research that became his life's work because he was interested in, it was a technique he used with his clients called trauma writing. And I don't know if you've ever heard of trauma writing, but it's a simple idea that people who have undergone trauma, they write about their trauma. They write essays about the traumatic event. Now, what Pennebaker noticed was that some people who did this had incredible changes happen as a result, and their post-traumatic stress just evaporated and disappeared over a number of weeks or months doing these trauma writing exercises. And other people had no difference at all, didn't make a dent. So Pennebaker's thinking, well, what's the difference? What's the difference that makes the difference?
Yeah.
Now, it happened to be at the time he had an undergraduate student who had been a computer programmer and was retraining as a clinical psychologist. And she suggested they write a program to analyse the use of language. They built lexicons into this computer program to figure out what kind of word usage was going on, to see if they could get some sense out of it and analyse it and see what the difference was. To cut a long story short, it turned out that the people that made changes were people who every time they wrote the essay, they changed perspectives and they changed meanings and they explored the material from slightly different perspectives. They tried to make new meanings around it. They questioned things. They re-examined things. And those people made great changes. The people who didn't make changes just told the same story over and over and over again, with the same meanings and the same perspectives. And for me, that highlights the essence of change. The essence of change is being able to get all the semantic material of your life, or the relevant bits, disembed from them enough to explore with different perspectives and different takes on things, so you literally change the sense you have made around things. And when you do that, you have a different experience, because the sense we make around things, the framing, is from that emerges our emotional responses, our behaviours, our thoughts, our feelings, all of these things. They just emerge mostly. We don't consciously choose them. They emerge from the way we have life organised. So when you can go in and you can look at that and you can explore that, then you get different. So when I do change work with people these days, I look at it as being a process of exploration and repatterning.
And going into the concretes for a bit, how would you exactly do that?
Okay, so first of all, we want to get some sense of how they're organising their reality in that moment. Now, mostly, I was having a discussion this morning with somebody about this. After a while, when you have an understanding or develop a map of how people do life, you can start listening for certain structures in their language. You can start listening for where there are binds, listening for what kinds of fundamental metaphors are at play. Let me give you an example. I was talking to somebody the other day about weight management stuff.
Yeah.
And they kept talking about being on a calorie-controlled diet. Now, if I hear a phrase like calorie-controlled diet, I think to myself, what are the fundamental concepts at play here? Well, control is a big concept. And what's control about in this instance? Well, control is usually about trying to stop certain things or trying to restrict certain things. Something that wants to do something else and you're trying to stop it and make it do this. Right? So when someone's talking about a calorie-controlled diet, I'm not saying this is true absolutely, but there's a good probability that they have a sense that there's something that wants to happen and they're trying to make it happen differently by overcoming it by use of force. So I wanted to lead this person from structuring their reality around calorie-controlled diet to, if they were going to be using calories, I wanted them to move to a place of calorie awareness or calorie consciousness, and then being empowered to make choices from a place of awareness and consciousness, which is very different from having a big thing that wants to do one thing and you wanted to do something else and trying to control it. That's a completely different way of organising that particular piece of reality. Yeah. Now, of course, they don't think there's any issue with talking about calorie control. If you said to them, you realise that calorie control frame probably isn't helping you, they'd go, what are you talking about? It's just what it's called. It's called a calorie controlled diet. Oh, it's just words. Oh, whatever. It's not important. Now, yeah, it is words, but the question is, what needs to be true? What kind of elements of worldview need to be true for those words to make sense and operate? And are they helping this person? I don't want the person struggling against something that wants to be one way and they want it to be another, so they're trying to control it. I prefer them to step into their power, to be conscious and be aware and make choices. So those are two different ways of being in the world, and I want to help the person move from the way that's not helping them to a way that's going to help them, a way where they're going to be empowered. And it's a fundamental restructuring.
So before starting any hypnotic work or any, if you do trance work at all, I don't know, before you start any reprogramming, so to speak, you first find out what their worldview looks like and why their worldview is not helping them, and to which frame, frame, you could say, you can change it so that it is helping them.
Yeah, totally. And this, I find, most of the information comes up at how they're structuring their reality informally during the first 15 minutes of conversation. However, that's one element. Another element is formal modelling of how they're organising reality. Now, for this, I will use symbolic modelling and clean language, which I don't know if it's something that you're familiar with, but it's a huge influence.
Help me out. What do you mean by formal modelling?
Okay, so symbolic modelling is the idea that if you lead somebody in a particular process in a particular way and you stay clean, you don't introduce any content, you can start to symbolically map out how they are organising their reality under the surface of things. So if you say to somebody, what would you like to have happen? And they say, I don't know, I've just got this, I just seem to be totally stuck at the moment, they might say. Now, the way clean language and symbolic modelling works is you would say, and you seem to be totally stuck at the moment. And they're going to say yes, because you just fed back what they've just said. And you say, and when stuck, what kind of stuck is that stuck? Now, when you facilitate this, you don't want them going off into their intellectual headspace. You want them connected to their embodied reality. You want them connected to themselves in their totality. So there's some facilitation here. But they might say, I don't know, stuck, just like I'm trying to move forward, but it's like I'm wading through treacle. Now, when they say this, you can guarantee their body will be moving. Their body will start to enact that reality.
Yeah.
Now, what you're getting coming out is the underlying metaphorical structure, or are metaphors that map the underlying semantic structure. So they're stuck. And it's like when they try and move, they're stuck in treacle, and they'll be gesturing this. And you'll also start to see where the treacle is in their psychoactive mapping of this. So they will gesture towards the treacle. They won't be consciously aware of this, but you can start to bring them closer and closer to it. And what kind of treacle is that treacle? It's just sticky, and it's... Now, some people will try and pop out and go, I'm sorry, this is a bit weird. Why are you asking me these questions? But if you ask within a hypnotic context, they don't. So if you do a thing and you say, okay, we're going to run a process, what I'd like for you to do is just be willing to alter your consciousness and allow your mind to connect to the deeper details. You might not normally be able to find yourself paying attention to those now. And you take them in, so you do the hypnotic framing, but you start to explore, and what you often get is you get what's called a metaphor landscape. So I'll give you an example very quickly. I had a client the other day. He was in, and he came in for, what's it called? It was for anxiety attacks. It was for, not anxiety attacks. Claustrophobia. That's what.
Okay.
Claustrophobia. So he was having kind of panic attacks when he was on trains and things like this. So we started to get a model together. Of this and how this worked. So I said, when you have these when you have this claustrophobia, what would you like to have happen? And he said, instantly he went into this kind of space where he said, I want to be serene and calm. And so now he's giving me what he wants. And as I modelled this out, asking various questions, he's gesturing to this place in space. And he's saying that it's just this version of me, and I'm like a Buddha, and nothing matters. Now, this seems like a resource, but then when we get to nothing matters and we start modelling it out, it also turns out that nothing matters means that everything is meaningless. So his resource, his Zen-like resource, turns out to be a problem. Now, as I'm talking to him, I'm noticing this is all located in space in a particular area, and he's interacting with it. And I notice he's deliberately not attending to what's over on the other side of him. It's almost like he daren't look there. This is what it looks like to me. So I test my hunch, I test my hypotheses, and I say, and when all of that is there, and I'm gesturing in space to it, what is over there? And the guy turns around and looks, and his eyes go like saucers, and he says, a swirling black cloud of fear. Now he's looking at this like somebody looking at a hallucinated dog. He's looking at all these things that are coming out. He's literally starting to hallucinate them, and this is a very common thing when you work this way. So you map out the structure, and people end up hallucinating it around them. And it turns out in this particular organisation of reality, he's caught between either moving towards this Zen-like state where he feels no fear, in which case life has no meaning anymore, or moving towards the fear and anxiety, which terrifies him. And within this organisation of reality, he has no choices. He's caught between these two poles. There's no third place. So I mapped that out and had him step outside of it and put him back into another resource state that we put him in, and had him step outside of that and take a space where he could look at and see both those structures. And when he could do that, I invited him to notice and realise that none of that is him. It's just the way he organises his reality when he's in there. And he's going, whoa. And I said, because this is really different over here, isn't it? Now, when he's inside of it and he's being had by it, all of that stuff about the black cloud of fear, all of that seems true. And that would normally be, that's a representation of what's normally going on outside of consciousness. But brought into consciousness. Now he has the ability to identify it. He no longer identifies with it. He's no longer had by it. And he now has a choice. So in a way, this is de-hypnosis. Because we are looking at, we are eliciting the hypnotic reality and giving it a structure, then stepping him outside of it and having him look at it and go, that's what I've been doing. And that isn't me, because I'm stood over here and I can do that too. And now I know that, and I can bring my consciousness to bear upon it, I can disembed from it much more easily, and now I'm free to build a new reality. And then we can do some hypnotic work to build the new reality as well. So that's. I know that sounds very abstract and far out when I'm talking about it.
Let's try and bring it down to the basic question again, and perhaps you find a way of giving a simple formula, if you have, or a blueprint, or a way of giving it a simple structure of how change works. Because I found that very interesting of how you use the pacing, so be it, or actually looking into his reality to then change it. And perhaps you find a way of putting it into simple, like into one sentence.
Well, I think the essence of change for me is the shifting of perspective or the reorganisation of semantic material, which makes a difference. Mm-hmm. And then the next key piece is attending to the difference and noticing the difference that difference makes. So there's Gregory Bateson's old term, the difference that makes the difference. Mm-hmm. One of the important aspects of facilitating change is, yes, getting difference, but then maturing that new perspective. And that's an important thing. And partly this is around drawing attention to difference, but also mapping out and modelling out the difference that difference makes. So in simple terms, after any conversation you have with someone, even a simple coaching conversation that has no overt hypnosis stuff in, you can say, oh, incidentally, we've had this conversation, but what is it that you know now that you didn't know before? And they'll say, well, I know that I've got more choices, I think, than I thought I had before. Let's say they say that. And you say, okay, so you know that you've got more choices. And they say, yes. And you say, and when you've got more choices, what difference does that make? And then that sends their mind. Remember I was talking before about the use of language and communication to direct attention and seed ideas. So here, I'm doing exactly this. What do you know now that you didn't know before? I'm seeding the idea that they know something that they didn't know before. There's a presupposition. Mm. They tell me what it is. I feed it back and I say, when you know that, what difference does that make? I'm directing their attention towards difference, but I'm also seeding the idea that there is a difference. And what they'll often say, they'll come back with, I don't know, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter what they come back with. I don't know. I just feel more, just kind of more centred and more at peace. and you feel more centered and more at peace, feeding it right back. And they say, yeah. And I can say, and what kind of centered is that? And start modelling that out. Well, it's just very solid, and it's very solid. And whereabouts do you feel that? Whereabouts do you experience that solid? Yeah, in my body. And when you experience that solid in your body, what difference does that make? I just feel a lot more like I can handle things. And you will model it out. And then I'll ask, you bring all the detail in. And when you have that solid and you can handle things, is there a time or a place coming up in the next few days or weeks where that will make a really useful difference for you? Yeah, on Thursday, when I'm going to do this presentation to the board. On Thursday. When you think about that now, what do you notice that's different? So it's this continual orientation to difference.
Yeah.
Because if there's no difference, there's no change. It's really that simple. Without difference, there is no change. And change is difference. So knowing that, I want to facilitate attending to difference and the difference that difference makes, unpacking and maturing the difference, if that makes sense.
It does. You mentioned it before, and I think part of what you just said already explained that. But in short, if you had to explain to somebody what clean language is, what is clean language?
Now, clean language with a capital C and a capital L is a particular language system developed by the New Zealand hypnotist David Grove, who unfortunately died just a few years ago, quite young, of a heart attack in his 50s, which is unfortunate because the guy was an incredibly creative thinker in hypnosis. Now, he started out with a question back in the early 80s. His question was, when people dissociate, where do they go? That was his starting point. So he started to want to get information from people about their experience, where they're going in their head, where they're moving in their mind. And he wanted to do so in a way that was clean, that he wouldn't be introducing his ideas and concepts and presuppositions.
So that's the definition of clean. Clean meaning not adding any content by yourself, not giving value to it, just...
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what clean doesn't mean is it doesn't mean, clean is very directive. It's a very directive language system, clean language is. It really directs attention. But the idea is to avoid seeding ideas. Now, I am quite happy to seed ideas.
Yeah.
So, I don't necessarily use cleanly. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I want to stay well out. And if somebody says, I just feel I feel this heaviness, I'm going to say, what kind of heaviness is that heaviness? And that's just me staying as clean as possible.
So it's a bit of an impartial version of the meta model.
In a way, it is, but in a way, it's different. I think for me, the meta model is about listening to structures and being aware that those structures have implications and sometimes questioning them. But the meta model often questions a structure from a deconstructive place. It wants to break that structure down. Whereas what clean language questioning tries to do is to leave the thing being questioned intact and elicit more information about it and more detail without breaking it down whilst leaving
But I meant with the impartial version in terms of not attacking the system itself, but just...
Yeah, you want to leave everything...
Trying to understand it.
Yeah, so, you get what kind of X is that X? Is there anything else about that X? Whereabouts is that X? Where could that X come from? What happens just before? What happens just after? Sort of questions like this, getting details, getting spatial locations, getting linear, temporal sequences that kind of come out, sources for things. But, there are certain... You can't be devoid of presuppositions. The whole system is based on certain presuppositions. But it's trying to avoid... bringing too much content in. And the idea is to stay out. One of the things David Grove was really keen on is that you as the operator, it should be, when you do it well, almost like you're invisible. And they are so vividly, deeply embedded in their experience of mapping this thing out. And you are not there to get rapport with the client. You are there to facilitate the client's rapport with their own unconscious material.
Yeah. You can't give a whole lecture on how it works, but for somebody who hasn't worked with clean language and doesn't know the system, is there anything concrete you could give them, like a couple of questions that are useful to be used to find your way around somebody else's map, or some concrete first steps that somebody could use to play around a bit with the concept of asking these kinds of questions.
I will do, and it's more than the questions. Clean languages are misleading. It's more about understanding how people organise their reality under the surface. But the primary driving question, the starting question that usually starts most clean language sessions is, what would you like to have happen? And it could be someone's just given a problem. My husband's leaving me and my kids have grown up and I just don't know where I want to go in life. And you ask the question on what would you like to have happen? And ideally, you're going to want to get them to say they're going to be going something like, I just want to get back on track with things, they might say. And then you will say, and back on track. And when back on track, you're always feeding back their language, which is part of the Hypnosis Without Trance approach. And when back on track, what kind of track is that track that you're back on? And they'll start to get into detail. So the next kind of question is the first developing question. What kind of X is that X?
Yeah.
You could ask it superficially. Someone could say, let's go out and get lunch. And you could say, what kind of lunch is that lunch that you'd like to get? And they might say, I'd like let's just get some sandwiches. Or you could ask it about something profound. Now, if somebody, what kind of track is that track? Well, it's a track. It's just a track where I have a sense of where I'm going. And it's a track where you have a sense of where you're going. And is there anything else about that track when you have a sense of where you're going? Now, as you ask these questions, you're sitting with the person, you're watching where they're gesturing and how they're mapping stuff out in space. And you interact with where they gesture, not with them, so to speak. So you're facilitating the rapport with their material. And then you might ask location questions. And whereabouts is that track? Now, you might know, because they've been gesturing outside of consciousness, and you gesture to where they've been gesturing and say, whereabouts is that? And they go, it's here. It's kind of stretching out in front of me. Now, they've just entered a weird hypnotic reality, which is being generated from their own unconscious material and organisation of things. And they'll start spatially mapping it out around them.
So you basically help de-generalizing stuff without attacking the system itself.
Yeah, and ideally, what usually happens, and when you understand the skill and what you're doing, they will end up with the material unpacked in the space around them, within them and around them. And then they can interact with that, it's often called a metaphor landscape. They can interact with it in interesting ways. It's a very hypnotic process. David Grove used to talk about it in terms of generating a naturalistic trance. But the hallucinated material isn't hallucinated because you've said, look over there and see X, or I want you to imagine. If you compare it to a parts integration from an LP, on that hand, see the part that X. Now, you're introducing content and telling them where it's going to be. With clean language, you're not. It is where it is. It is where it gets unpacked.
Yeah.
Once it's there, they can interact with it. And, you don't tend to swish bits about and this kind of thing, but you can move them around within the landscape.
So it just builds upon the fact that most people are visual enough to imagine things in certain spaces.
Well, this is the thing. It turns out that if you do it cleanly and you gently pace and lead people towards that reality, everybody does it anyway.
Yeah.
If you ask them to visualise, many people will say they can't.
Yeah.
And yet, one of the things I know from working with clean language is people constantly hallucinate their reality in the spaces around them.
Yeah.
They don't even know they're doing it. They think they're just gesturing here randomly or looking over there randomly. But outside of conscious awareness, they are projecting visual material and visually representing stuff spatially.
Yeah.
Your gestures aren't random. Where people look during conversations aren't random. How they move their body isn't random.
That so reminds me of a sentence. A good friend, actually my best friend, Stefan Kraft, he's a director, said when we talked about the ideodynamic model, and then after a couple of glasses of wine, he came up with a phrase. It was just a byplay phrase, actually, but it stuck to my mind. It was, the human brain is ideodynamic, always. If it weren't, it would be totally useless. And that just came to my mind in a second. It's very interesting. Could you, you said, what about that X? Is it that? And questions like those. Are there like 3, 4, 5 questions?
In the basic formalized clean language system, there are 12 or 13 questions, depending on how you count them, because some of the questions have variants, and you can say, well, is that 2 questions or is that the same question?
Yeah.
Like, for example, what kind of tree is that tree, or what kind of heavy is that heavy? Is one question, and then is there anything else about heavy? Well, you're just asking for more detail.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean, but it's still the about.
Do you have 3 or 4 more of those? I think that's very interesting for somebody who's just getting started knowing about clean language.
Yeah, so let's pick the word heavy. What kind of heavy is that heavy? Is there anything else about heavy? And whereabouts is that heavy? Now, if you've got someone psychoactively engaged, they may say, it's in my chest or whatever. If they're in their brain space, they may say, it's at work, which isn't really the kind of answer you're looking for. Here's other things, you could say, and when heavy, what happens just before heavy? Now we're starting to get into the sequence, what they might call strategy in NLP.
Yeah.
What happens just before heavy, and what happens just after heavy? Now when you're mapping out a landscape, another question that might come up is the relationship questions. If someone's got heavy in their chest, and they've got bright light over here, or whatever, or hope over here, you could ask a relationship question. You could say, and is there a relationship between heavy and bright light? So now you're starting to get relationships, and they might say something like, when the heavy is there, the light gets dimmer. And then you start to get a sense of the relationships that are being matched out. So there's the relationship question. What happens just before question, or what happens afterwards question. And there's also, at the end, there's the source question. You could say, where could heavy come from? Mm-hmm. In which case they might say, I think it comes from my mother, or it could be something like that, some kind of thing that tracks back. And you often get spontaneous regressions happening within this as well.
Yeah.
Now, you can also ask necessary condition questions. If somebody's come up with a solution, because people often spontaneously generate solutions through this process, and they say, I just need to have more of that light and less of that heavy, for example, if they say.
Yeah.
You might say, and what would need to happen for you to have more of that light and less of that heavy? And now you're getting into what's called a necessary conditions. And they might say, I just need to take control of it more. And then
can you ask, how will you know that you have taken control about it?
You could do. That's one choice. I mean, generally, it's not one of the standard questions, but you could ask that. How would you know when you've taken control of it? Or you could ask, what kind of control is that control?
True.
And you're back into the basic, what are often called the name and address questions, which are the what kind of and whereabouts. Those are the questions that often come up a lot. Or you could kind of move on through it, and they say, more control. And you say, what needs to happen? They say, I need more control. You could just ask, and can you have more control? And if they say yes, then great, job done.
Yeah.
They might say yes, and I might say, and where could that control come from? And they just say, and it just comes from within me. And I might say, and whereabouts within you? Just to model out. This is something that David Grove talked about called maturing changes. So just because somebody says yes, you don't necessarily go, oh, great, we're done. You're cooked. You mature the changes.
Yeah.
And you model it out even more, and then it embeds even more deeply. So, it's a quick tour. In a way, clean language is deceptively simple, but it's actually quite rich and quite deep when you look at the structures that are under the surface that guide your asking of the questions.
It is. It's beautiful. Now, question in my mind, big and bold, is, now I got all that mapped out. What do I do with it? I know what kind of fear he has, or he knows what kind of fear he has, where it is located, where it comes from, what the solution could be, etc.
Yeah.
Now, what do we do with it?
Well, when it's mapped out, one of several things can happen. As you map out and as you develop things, particularly if you move them through time and you bring in necessary conditions, also you can ask that question, what would you like to have happen? If somebody gets stuck in something within that thing that you're modelling out, and they say, I just feel it's so heavy and it's crushing, you don't have to say what kind of heavy and crushing. You could say, and when it's heavy and crushing, what would you like to have happen? And then you're bringing the resourceful them back into the pattern. So often change evolves just out of doing the modelling process, and you follow it and you mature the change, and that becomes a change work process in and of itself.
Already, yeah.
Other times, somebody might not resolve a pattern from within inside of it. They may get stuck in a bind, and it just isn't going anywhere, and they are just stuck. In which case, you might want to invite them to step outside of it and actually move them around and have them take a different perspective from within it, and then build a separate resource somewhere else. And you could even, now this wouldn't be clean, but it's something that I'm happy to do, is you can have them build a separate resource somewhere else and then take that resource back into the original organisation and then map out how it transforms it.
What kind of resource would that resource be?
Good question. Excellent question.
I'm starting to get the system.
Yeah. So if you let me go back to the example I was talking about earlier with the guy who had the Zen-like version of himself, but where life was meaningless, and then the cloud of fear. And we couldn't get the guy out of this. Now, one of the things that was true within this system for me, looking at it from the outside, was there was no him with power in that system. He was totally at effect within that system. Now, the previous session we'd done together, we'd modelled out an incredible resource for him, which was him being dynamic, like a chainsaw cutting through things. And I knew where we'd done that in my other room, in the next room. So when we brought him out of this blocked system that wasn't resolving, to bring him out of that, I said, take all the time you need in the next few minutes to know anything that you need to know about this, either consciously or unconsciously. And when you know that, just take a breath in and breathe out and just let it all go. Then he took a breath in and breathed out. And he looked at me with a half smile and he said, pass the rope, because it was such a depressing thing for him. He's kind of making this sort of joke, I hope it's a joke, about hanging himself. Now, what I invited him to do was step out and step into this other resource, which we fired back up. Now, in this other resource, he is totally at cause. In one organisation of reality, he's totally at effect. In the other one, he's totally at cause. So I had him step into that, fire that up, and then I stepped him out to a meta position outside of both of those systems and had him notice how different his experience was in each one.
Yeah.
And then I said to him, I didn't do this formally, I could have done. Now you could call this a piece of conversational work. And I said, I wonder what would happen if you took that chainsaw and that you and that reality into that one. And I'm pointing all the time because we've got these things spatially mapped out. And the guy's looking there and looking there. And you can just see stuff going on. Now, I just let that cook. I didn't push it to any particular outcome. When I spoke to him a week later, he said he was going through a particularly stressful time at the moment. And he said, things are being really, really tough at the moment. But it hasn't got on top of me, he said. And the interesting thing that he also said is, and I've been firing up that chainsaw pretty regularly. Now, the chainsaw was an explicitly modelled out metaphor, cleanly modelled out. That was his thing. That was his representation. Now, if you get a resource state mapped out like that, it's so much more powerful than a classic NLP anchor where they're doing some arbitrary thing like squeezing their earlobe or squeezing their fingers together. They've got a symbol that was generated from within their system that represents the resource. Yeah. And it becomes really powerful. So in that instance, you can step outside, have them take meta perspectives, generate different states, look at bringing them in, doing that kind of work. So, my hypnotic work, I have quite extensive offices now. I have a training room and then I have a breakout room and all of these things. So often the hypnotic work that I do, and I see all of this as hypnotic, isn't confined to them sat in a chair. They're moving from space to space. at any point, I could do a trance induction if I wanted to. If I wanted to bring in the frame of them altering their state in useful ways, in other ways, I can just, you can mix it up. There's no reason to stay trapped within any particular modality.
Which sometimes greatly helps with just getting them to connect with their inside, just because they got their eyes closed.
Sure, totally.
Still value in that. Now, we've already been through a great talk and gone into depth extensively.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take any more of your time than, let's say, another 20 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I could talk all night about this stuff, so you'll probably be fed up before I am.
That was a mistake, Mr. Tripp, to say out loud. Right, because I still got a couple of questions for you, and I'm happy we can get at least some of them. Because, I think we're all getting great value out of this from listening. Thanks a lot already. One question I have, or one thing that always is on my mind is when I'm facilitating somebody's change, the thing I sometimes stumble upon is that whether or not that person is going to change often boils down to their actual commitment to do so. It's most obvious with, for example, smoke stop sessions. If somebody comes in and says, help me, quit me smoking. That's the best one anyways. And I ask him, why do you want to quit? And he goes, my wife sent me. That's the point where I usually go, right, that's the door. Because, if change is not coming from within the person, it's not going to happen, in my opinion. But the question is, commitment is a big one for me. But how do I get commitment from somebody? Or how do you get commitment from someone?
Okay, the first thing that I do is I just really spell it out. And, I'll explain to people that it's about how they engage with the process that counts. So I'll often listen to what the person has to say, and I'll say, okay, first thing is you can make some significant and profound changes around this. Of that, there is no question. Now, what I can do for you, I will say, is what I can do for you is I can help you map out and explore the patterns that are going on, and we can make adjustments to them. I want to be clear, this is a process you need to be willing to engage with. You need to be an active participant in this process. If you expect to sit there in the chair and just kind of flake out and have the magic wand waved, then it's not really going to work out. Now, I actually state this stuff on my website. I will work with you if, and I will give the conditions. I got this from Jürgen Rasmussen. Be absolutely clear. Get them. I will work with you under these circumstances. I won't work with you
if you're doing your problem as a hobby.
And I've just met up with a very old friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, could you call my mum? She needs to stop smoking." No, I can't call your mum because she needs to stop smoking. If your mum wants to stop smoking, she can call me. And that's the truth of it. When she asks me, and I often the question I will ask is, what are you willing to do to stop in order to stop? Are you really serious about this? Are you ready to do this? Those sorts of questions I ask people. Now, I often don't explicitly ask the stuff because I can tell straight off the bat somebody's attitude towards it. If somebody phones up and says to me, can you stop me smoking? My temptation is to say no, but I can show you how to, or something like that. I'll often I won't answer the question with a yes or a no, because if I say yes, well, I've just bought into their rubbish. If I say no, they're probably going to switch off at that point. So I don't necessarily want them to switch off at that point. If somebody says, can you stop me smoking? My response to that usually is, so you want to stop smoking? And they say yes. I'll say, okay, are you sure? Well, yeah. I use with smokers, I don't really see smokers these days, but I did, when I did see smokers, I use a lot of provocative therapy, Frank Farrelly style or Nick Kemp style. So Frank Farrelly approach is the provocative therapy approach. So, for example, in a smoker's context, the smoker comes in and says, can you stop smoking? You say, okay, so you say that you want to stop smoking. Well, yeah. What do you want to do that for? Come on, seriously. You don't want to stop smoking. That's boring. You're not boring every day. You're different, you know. Everybody stops smoking now. You know, what's the point? Well, you know, I want to look after my health. Health, you know, we've all got to go at some point. You may as well live, you know, enjoy every moment. And you enjoy smoking, right? Come on, seriously, you enjoy smoking? Well, yeah. I'll say, you know, you enjoy that one after a meal, because I know all smokers do. Come on, you get enjoyment from smoking. Tell me, how many are you smoking at the moment? Well, about 10, 15 a day. All right. First of all, double that. And I'll start with this, you know, this kind of provocative approach, and I'll bang on for about 15 minutes. And the trick is, you know, you do it with a twinkle in the eye, as Nick Kemp says, and they're not quite sure whether you're joking or whether you're serious. But after a bit, they're usually going, yeah, look, I just want to stop, okay? I just want to stop. And then they're almost begging to stop. At which point I'll kind of sigh and say, so you really want to do this then? And they'll say, yes. Okay, like I'm giving in. I've got them to convince me to help them to stop smoking. Rather than so many people come in with the frame of, well, you show me your hotshot stuff and see if you can really stop me. So, you know, I don't want to do that. I don't ever want to battle or fight with people. But I make it really, really clear with everybody I work with that we can do some great work. It's usually work of exploration and repatterning. It's a process they need to be willing to actively engage with. And if they are willing to actively engage, and if they are willing to do it, and they have the capability to do it, they will make changes. And they will. I'm not saying they'll do it this session. It may take more than one session, or it may take one session. One of the things I tend to do nowadays is I'll say, look, this is what we'll do. We do a session. We will explore what's going on. We'll uncover the patterns and we'll make some adjustments. And then one of three things will happen. You'll either go away, you'll notice the difference, and the difference will be close enough to what you want for you to say, yeah, this is it, and it'll be job done. Or you'll go away, you'll notice the difference, and you'll say, yeah, this is different, but it's not quite right, it's not quite there, in which case you come back, we do a little bit more exploration and repatterning, we make some adjustments. Or you'll come in, we'll do the work, and you'll think it's a complete load of old rubbish, and you'll walk away, and that'll be it. So, and people say, well, you can't say that to a client. And if a client turns around to me and says, is it a complete load of old rubbish? I'll say, no, it isn't. I'll say it's profoundly powerful. But it's not for everybody. Some people are not willing to engage. If you're willing to engage, you will get results. But I can't, you know, I can't guarantee, you know, that's down to you. You see what I mean? And that's an important thing for me, to make sure they take ownership for their willingness to engage in the process and stick with the process. And I'll frame it up that way, and I don't try and hide that in any way, because, you know, I don't want it to be me having to change them. I can't change anybody. They can change them, and I can help them. But I can't make them do anything. That's not strictly true, but it's a useful frame.
True. And tell them we get pre-framing, and it really gets people to commit. Talking about non-smokers already, talking about, well, smoke stop sessions already, what do you do if somebody does have that experience of has been to a session with you, and, I don't know, a couple of days later, weeks later, he calls you and says, well, Mr. Hypnotist, I'm still smoking. And they want to come in for a second session. What do you do in the second session?
Well, the first thing to say about this is I don't like to have failures, absolute failures. So I like to set things up so that doesn't happen very much. Now, I don't digitise success and failure. I don't think that's a useful thing. I like to look at degrees of success. So we either get a small success or a big success. But partly how I work with people is because I work with this thing about orientating to change and noticing differences. And that's a continual theme that runs all the time. What often happens is I'll make changes. And you notice I said before, we'll do work. we'll explore the patterns and we'll make some changes, and you go away and you notice the difference. Now, I explicitly bring this frame in all the time because when somebody comes back, if things are not perfect for them, then we've already framed that up as about paying attention to feedback and noticing difference. So somebody comes back and they said, I'm back on the cigarettes or something. I'll say, okay, so what happened? What did you have the opportunity to notice? It's a phrase I use a lot. What did you have the opportunity to notice? They'll say, well, it was really good up until this point, and then this happened. So I will elicit from them what worked about what we did, and I will elicit from them what happened to knock them off the path. And then I'll basically go back over, reinstall everything that worked, and then make adjustments based upon what knocked them off the path after having investigated that bit, and then pack them off, and off they go again. And there's a guy I worked with a number of years ago who was a crack cocaine addict. And he also was a business owner, so a lot of people think that you can't function as a crack cocaine addict. His business, just all the profits went into his crack habit, and yet he still ran the business.
Yeah.
But that guy saw me about 4 times over the space of about 14 months. And it was only on the 4th occasion that we finally, I was going to say finally cracked it, but that's an inappropriate choice of words.
But finally managed to manage up and around.
Yeah. Now, the first time, we did great work. He was off the crack for about 2 months, and then something happened to bring him back in. So I just went through that process. I fired back up what had worked, mapped out what went wrong, made adjustments, put that bit back in, packed the guy off again, and then something else happened. So we hadn't quite got to the bottom of what what hadn't worked. So sometimes there's an iterative process, but because of the way I frame it, it's very rare that somebody is going to go out and out failure, or if they are, it's been in the thing they thought the whole thing was nonsense from the start. If you see what I mean, which they won't do, providing they engage with the process. So I'm on a win-win. Otherwise, it's the whole frame of we make adjustments and you notice the difference, and we either make further adjustments or not. Giving an example of how this works, I had a guy come in. I've given this as a case study before, but I'll do it very quickly again. I had a guy come in who was he came in and he had a crush. He said he had a crush on a woman who he saw at the station regularly.
And he went, please, Mr. Hypnotist, make it go away.
He did. He wanted me to make it go away.
Really?
Yes, he did, because he was so in love, he said, with this girl, and she basically was freaked out by him and said, keep away from me. Anyway, when I saw him, he hadn't seen her for a number of months, but he still was dwelling on her and fantasizing about her, and he reminded me of myself when I was 15, and the first time I kind of fell in love with a girl, and I just, and I used to come home from school and go straight to bed with my aching heart, obsessing about her. But I was 15 years old at the time, and this guy was nearly 50 and was doing it. So, he hadn't grown out of that kind of behaviour. He was totally at effect to her beauty, to her amazingness and everything.
Yeah.
So I kind of sat him down in the room. I said, so tell me about her. And he said, she has an amazing smile, and his face lit up, and you could see he was all aglow. Now, the thing that I instantly noticed, I was saying about listening to the structures. He said, she has an amazing smile. So the smile, for him, is amazing, objectively. He's not owning his framing of the smile. He's not owning his creation of that experience. He's not owning any interpretation of it. It is a fact that her smile is amazing and has this power over him.
Is that he's finding it amazing? It is amazing.
It is amazing. So as soon as he says, oh, she has an amazing smile, I think, okay, here we go. So I've gone straight in at that point. And said, okay, so just close your eyes. And I said, and you would know that smile if you were to see it now, wouldn't you? And he's got his eyes closed and he's all blissed out going, yes. And I said, just focus on that smile. And I want you to just notice her teeth. Now, all I was aiming to do was break down the Gestalt, if you see what I mean. I don't know if I'm using the word right, because that's obviously a German word. But break it into individual parts so it doesn't work anymore. But I happened to hit lucky with this. I said, just focus on her teeth. And his expression changed a bit. And I said, what is it you notice when you focus on her teeth and you notice her teeth? Hypnotic language, directing attention. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I said, yeah, what is it? He said, well, they're not quite white. I thought, they're not quite white. I said, oh, what? Oh, so they're yellow teeth, are they? And he said, no, they're not yellow. They're just not quite white. I said, what, are they brown? He said, no. And I said, well, look, I said, they're either white or there's some other colour. So what colour are they? And I pushed him, and he said, well, maybe they're a bit brown. I'm like, okay, here we go. I said, okay, so she's got brown teeth. And then he kind of opened his eyes. He said, this isn't fair. He said, this isn't fair. You're doing this. You shouldn't be saying these things about her. And I said, hang on a second. You've come in here because you want to change the way you feel about her, and yet you're defending her. Why is that? When you want to change how you feel. I said, you can either defend her or you can be willing to change something here. So I put him in a bind where he was no longer able to defend her. Put him back in. I said, okay, so what else do you notice about her teeth? And he said, well, they're not quite straight. So I said, oh, so they're crooked. Anyway, so I changed the thing, and I said, when you notice all of that, what happens to amazing? And he's... now, that's a clean language question. When X, what happens to Y? When you notice they're brown and they're crooked, that wasn't clean, me introducing brown and crooked. When you notice that, what happens to amazing? Well, where's that amazing gone now? Oh, yeah. So where was the amazing coming from? When you were paying attention to different things. So the lesson I want to teach the guy is what he pays attention to and how he frames it creates his experience. Now, of course, I ask him to notice, and as you notice that now, what do you notice that's different? What happens to crush? Where's it gone now? Oh, I said, okay, so it's pretty different. Then I map out the difference. What else do you notice that's different? And we do a lot of work. And I said, okay, so what I want for you to do is just go away and notice now the differences. And are there going to be any times or places coming up where you have a real opportunity to notice what you notice that's different? And he said, well, I don't know. I haven't seen her for a long time. Anyway, I got in contact with the guy a week later, and he said to me, I said, yeah, how's it going? He said, oh, it was incredible. It was like I was completely free, and then I saw her, and he hadn't seen her for months. He said, and I saw her, and it all came rushing back. Now, a lot of people would see that as a failure. You see, they go, oh, no, it didn't work. But because I'd set the frames about noticing the difference, I said, okay, and it all came rushing back. And what was it that you had the opportunity to notice this time? Which presupposes a difference. So I'm not having it that there was no difference, and it all came back. And he said, well, I guess I realised that actually I've been letting her do this to me. That was a big shift for this guy. And I said, you realise that you've been letting her do this to you. And when you realise that, what difference does that make? So again, back into this difference that makes the difference stuff. Well, I guess it's time for me to just take a little bit more control of the situation. And can you take a little bit more control of the situation? Yeah, I think so. Okay, what would you need to know that you can do that now? Well, and now we're getting into, it's a version of the what needs to happen, the necessary conditions. and start mapping it out. So what ostensibly looked like it could have been a failure, because I've set up this frame of making differences and paying attention to the differences, basically tuning in their feedback system, I think of it as. We can always work from this frame, and there always is difference. But just like that guy was only paying attention to certain qualities within her smile and framing it up as amazing, clients will pay attention to certain qualities within their experience, which means they can have great difference and eradicate that difference by framing it up as no difference, by noticing what isn't different. But if you set the frames right, you can always guide the process. And that's something that I like to make sure always happens in the work that I do with people. So there's a continual measured progress. And every time I ask the question, what's different and how is that different, and tune them into difference, every time they feed back to me, I see it as bringing to bear Robert Cialdini's commitment and consistency principle. They start to commit to the difference, the new reality, the change, and it builds it back into the system. And it's part of the process I call feedback and feed forward. It feeds back into the system and then feeds forward into their future.
Well, that's the reason why you listed reality reports, right?
Yeah, absolutely, totally. You know, in the Hypnosis Without Trance stuff, it's kind of around superficial things like hypnotic phenomena and things like this. But it's really, for me, part of what I call the essence of change set, which is a set of questions that I use to drive change that's based around the difference that makes the difference, and also an attitude of orientating people to difference, and an attitude of setting up feedback systems within the client that allow for generative change to take place and feed forward generatively into their future. And I think when you get all this stuff right, providing people engage with the process, they cannot not change.
That's true. That's true. Talking about commitment, what also automatically springs to mind is the notion of responsibility. Because when I work with somebody and I'm having this, I feel I don't. I mean, sometimes you've got a clean, easy session, right? Especially when you're working with trance in hypnosis. You get them in, have a short pre-talk, you zap them with big quotation marks. You run a format, be it the phobia cure or something, they have no fear anymore whatsoever, done deal, easy. But a lot of times that's not how life is, right? That's not the way change works with everyone.
Yeah.
Which makes it interesting, but which also sometimes makes it complicated, of course. And sometimes when I then start getting flexible and creative and finding new ways to tackle the problem again and again until I feel I get to resolving it, I sometimes have people where whenever I feel like I get to grips with something, they kind of glide out of my hands. And I got the feeling they're doing it actively, as if to defend themselves for how they are and how they actually shouldn't change, even though that's what they're here for.
Yeah.
So too often what happens is, I'm telling them, because for me a big part of what makes change is action. At some point, what happens in your mind, etc., is cool, but at some point you got to create the experience that then fosters the belief, the imagination, the physio, etc. Right? So you got to get into action, and that's the point when some clients come up with stuff that clearly shows me they're not taking full responsibility. I've once had a woman in a session who said, "Well, but you know, you wouldn't understand because I really had a hard childhood." Or, yeah, I know I should be able to do that, but my father always. Yeah, that's what the other therapist said as well. But then he said as well that I've been the queen of Atlantis in my last life, so of course I can't do it. And that kind of crap. And what it boils down to for me is always saying, you know what, there's two ways. If you want to, you'll find one. If you don't, you'll find excuses. Yeah. Which one do you want to do? But that's my way of going at it, and it doesn't always lead to where it should, even though it does a lot of the time. So what is your suggestion for dealing with responsibility in terms of how do you get them to take responsibility?
Okay, often this is done up front for me because I don't want that kind of client anymore. I'm tired of working with that kind of client. So I often use a metaphor. If I get the sense that the client is like that, if they're already making excuses at the front end in the first phone call, I'll call it as I see it, and I'll say, look, I get the sense that you are waiting for something to happen so as you can get on and do the thing that you want to do and make the change that you want to make. You're waiting for your fear to go away. You're waiting for your... Do you see what I mean? Whatever it might be. You're waiting for your anxiety to go away. You're waiting to have the confidence, whatever it might be. And you think that when that happens, then you'll be able to start your journey. But the only thing
actually, it's the other way around.
Yeah, so I say, so you're like somebody who's sat next to the road of life on a rock, and you're waiting for something to happen, and then when it happens, you'll get up off the rock and you'll start the journey. But there's only one thing that needs to happen for you to do that, and that's to just get up off the rock and start the journey. Now, when you do that and you're willing to do that, I can help you.
Yeah.
But until you're willing to do that, I can't. And, if it's an issue of fear or anxiety, I'll say, when you do that and you start the journey, you're going to encounter things that are challenges that bring that fear up, that create difficulties. And when that happens, I can help you out. Now, I often say things like, I can't say you won't have any fear. I can't make you immune from fear. But what I can help you do is have your fear without your fear having you. So I can help you move forward. Yeah. So, but the way I'm framing this, using this metaphor, is you have to get up off that rock and start the journey, because it's you that's going to make the journey, and I'm going to be there to help you. Now, if I frame this up this way ahead of time, I will say right now that I do less and less one-off change work sessions and more 3-month coaching programs for people, where we look at many areas of their lives and empowering them generally and moving them much more towards being the kind of person that they want to be. Yeah. And not just stopping them lighting their nails or smoking or whatever. So maybe you would call it coaching, but it's very hypnotic. So I want to get them to commit to a journey, and I want them to be clear that they're going to do this up front. Sometimes I'll get the sense that people are unwilling. I remember I've asked questions before in the past, like, what would you be willing to do to make this change? If there was a miracle cure in New York... I asked a guy this once, if there was a miracle cure for this in New York and you had to fly over there to get it fixed, would you do that? He said, no. I said, then there's nothing that I can do for you. Because, if you don't care about it, if it's not important enough for you to do this. I had another guy who had erectile dysfunction. And he was a very successful business guy and had about 5 businesses on the go. And he was working on a new business project. Now, I said to this guy, would you be willing to put aside this new business project to sort out this other issue that you have? And he said, no, I can't really do that. So for him, he would have rather continued with the erectile dysfunction and had his new business succeed rather than... forfeit one of his new business ideas to fix his erectile dysfunction. So for me, that said something about his commitment, his willingness to engage with the process. So I'll often deal with it ahead of time. Now let me roll back to the days when I didn't deal with it ahead of time, and I would often get clients who would come up with their excuses. And I would just stop. When they would make excuses, I would say something like, are you really serious about making this change? And they would say, yes. And I'll say, because what you're doing at the moment is you're justifying to me why you can't make it. Now, you're welcome to do that. But if you're serious about making the change, then sitting here and justifying to me why you can't do it is guaranteed to just halt the whole process. So you have a choice right now. You can either commit to making the change, or you can defend and come up with all the reasons. And there's an old saying that I heard from Paul McKenna originally, which is quite slick. I never say it to clients, but I think it's very true, is you can have what you want, or you can have your reasons for not having it. And it comes down to that. So I often, it's what I call calling them on their shit, basically. That's my technical term for it. If somebody's there coming out with their excuses, I'll just say, you're justifying to me, and you're justifying to yourself why you can't change. And that's fine, you can do that. But if you do that, you know where that leads. And is that what you want? If it is, go ahead. Another technique that you can use, which I'll use occasionally, is an old Bandler technique from persuasion engineering, where you say to them, I want you to tell me that you don't want to change. And they go, well, I do want to change. I do. No, tell me that you don't. Well, but I do. Okay, well, a minute ago you were just giving me all these reasons why you can't. And that tells me you don't really want to. So I think it's best if we're just honest with each other about this. But I do. Okay, well, in that case we can work, but you're going to have to let go of all that stuff. Are you willing to do that? I love the question, are you willing to do that? I love that question.
That's a great one, yeah.
A really powerful question. You put something on the table, you say, this is what needs to happen, are you willing to do that? And it could be a practical thing that they actually do need to do, or it could be a completely unrelated abstract thing that just gives you a sense of how far they're willing to go and how committed they're willing to be. But in that instance, it's, you'll need to put those excuses to one side. I know you believe that they're true, but that's just part of the pattern for justifying why you can't change. So are you willing to put those to one side? Yeah, I am. Then you have a contract, and they can't bring them up again because they're breaking the verbal contract that you have. That's
great, yeah. You brought one thing up in the answer to the last question. I just want to pop back to that for a second, because I know you got a very specific approach or kind of unique approach to failure, and you have your own DVD set out there. Is it CDs? The No Fail Protocol, which
there's DVDs and CDs.
I think is great and recommend it to anyone. So I just wanted to ask you: do you remember any one time that you screwed up monumentally?
Yes, I do.
And what did you learn from that? So, yeah.
I don't know. It depends on how you talk about monumental screwing up. I mean, it was a total failure.
That's good enough for me.
It was an occasion last year when Jeffrey Stevens came over to the UK and said, "Will you open my workshop up?" And I said that I would, and I did something with the group where I think it was a group drop back, something like that. And there was one guy in the group who seemed to really respond. He seemed to respond so strongly that I just picked him up and I pulled him out of the group, and in the most nonchalant and lazy way, because I was so sure that he was just going to be a great responder, I attempted to stick his hand to the wall, and it totally failed. Now, I've got all the kind of no-fail protocols and things in place, but I just didn't utilise any of them because I had no doubt in my mind that the hand was going to stick, if you see what I mean. I kind of got caught out. I was so overconfident and so cocky about it that, I just wasn't in that headspace to even be that responsive. And I'm just being lazy and telling him that his hand's stuck, and he just lifts it off the wall and looks at it. And I said, that's okay, just put it back, and this time you can look at that now, and you know what you experienced out there. And he said, and you can experience that now, sticking your hand to the wall solidly. And he's just taken it off the wall again. And of course, everyone in this group, I'm opening up this thing as the hypnotist. And I don't like that. I like to have my first demo of the day go pretty successfully.
So how did you react? How did it go?
In that moment, I said, okay, I would have no-failed it. I don't remember. But I would have no-failed it in at least utilising it. And I said, okay, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, there is a lesson to be learned here. And I probably would have just explained it as it was. I really can't remember what I did. But I remember that evening because I remember for the first half of it, I was really awful. I was rubbish. I don't know what it was. I just was not in the zone.
Yeah.
I was totally not in the zone for it. I was not in the headspace. About halfway through the evening, everything clicked in, and I was in flow. And once that happened, we had all sorts of fun going on, hallucinations, this, that, and the other. I just was not in the zone, and I was not in flow. Now, one of the things that I've come to realise over time, it comes back to this point about ego again. It's only ever a problem if I'm making it about me anyway. That's the thing. When I developed the no-fail stuff, which is all about technical manoeuvring, I was still trying to protect my ego and my identity as a hypnotist. And I'm not saying I regret doing that, because I developed a lot of flexibility and a lot of protocols for manoeuvring that still serve me to this day. But they're not driven by ego anymore. And once upon a time it was driven by not wanting to ever be wrong, if you see what I mean, not wanting to ever fail, because if I failed, then what does that say about me as a hypnotist? So I can't ever be seen to fail. But now I've got really, really clear, much clearer about what it means to me to be a hypnotist and what really is going on. It's not an issue anymore. So I don't tend to get the failure. I don't tend to have to use the kind of no-fail stuff as much as I used to, because I'm framing things different right off the bat. Although it still does come in useful. But I would say that occasion sticks out in my mind as being one of the worst demonstrations. And it was embarrassing as well, because Jeff had asked me to open the weekend. And I would rather have not looked crap in front of Jeff too, not just the room. But it happens. And one of the things that I teach on my hypnosis weekends is that to become a good hypnotist, you need to cultivate a really good relationship with failure, because it is going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And you better bloody well get a good relationship with it. Now, the better relationship that you get with it, I think the less and less that it happens, and the more you get smart about framing it. But the truth of the matter is, there is no hypnotist on the planet who can hypnotise 100% of people in 100% of contexts. That guy or girl does not exist.
Yep.
And some people will try and claim that they are that person, and they will sell their courses off the back of that.
No, John never would. Never would.
Yeah, but the fact is this is a game of subtlety and nuance, and you can stack the odds. I don't believe in mind control. I believe you can influence people, but I think there's a big difference between control and influence. I think you can influence people in this direction, that direction. You can encourage them. You can get smart. You can stack the odds in your favour. You can be adaptable. You can be flexible. But what you can never do is be 100% in control of that situation and make everything you want to have happen exactly the way you want it to happen.
I think it's true, and I think it's a great way of looking at it, that you got to embrace failure in any area of life, and especially in hypnosis, because it's got to happen. It's what I found out, both the hard way and the flexible way. But yeah, it is going to happen, and I just hope for anybody learning hypnosis that they just accept that, embrace it, and take all the learning out of any situation where it does happen. But yeah, it will, and it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, and of course, the less as the hypnotist. I'm not a big believer in this whole be the hypnotist thing. I think, yes, take the lead in the situation. Step up and take responsibility for your role. But understand that really it's about the experience of the client and their capacity to generate that. And you're there as a facilitator. I use that term again, facilitator of experience. It's not about having magic powers. And it doesn't mean anything. If that person isn't ready or is in the right place at the right time to do it, that might just be so. And that's okay.
I think it's about having the flexibility to facilitate a change of a person in the way that person needs or can work with. Because I personally am a big believer of being the hypnotist, just because it served me so well in the past. And but still, what I find is that there are certain types of clients that works with brilliantly, and you can so much better help them make the change because you are being, not authoritative, but not dominant per se, but strong in your lead.
I think that's always important. Personally, when I say I don't believe that it's necessary to be the hypnotist, I mean on an ego level, on an ego attachment level. I think it's very important to be the person who is in charge. I think it's important to be the leader.
Yeah.
That I think is very important.
And then, depending on what kind of person you're working with, you can either be more leading or more of a tour guide, giving them the power. You know, if somebody's so much of a control freak, you want them to know that they are in power and that they are making change. Some people who are really good at just letting go and letting it happen. Sometimes I personally feel it's okay to just, go through making the change with them. And you can skip a lot of the double binds and a lot of the vagueness and just tell them and assure them. I think that's what it's partially about. Empower them by assuring them that change will happen.
Yeah, I think there's many ways to slice it. I'm saying I'm not a big fan of being the hypnotist, and in saying that, I want to own that. Yeah. That is a part of how I frame my reality and what I personally find useful and what I don't. There are other hypnotists out there who I call power hypnotists, who it's very important for them to be the hypnotist, and it's their strong identity as a hypnotist and their unwavering belief in their mind control skills that generate the results that they get. And it would be entirely inappropriate for me to turn around to those people who are getting results with their approach and say, hey, no, you want to stop thinking about it like that. You want to think about it like this. Yeah. That would be wholly inappropriate. And the thing that, I think when I work with people to teach them to become hypnotists, what I want to do is I want to teach them to become the hypnotist that's right for them to be.
Exactly. I think that's the beauty of it all. We all are going to be different hypnotists, and everybody's going to find a way that suits him and fits for him. And as long as it works, as long as you are producing results, I think any approach is valuable. And I think talking about the power hypnotists who must have, as you said, that unwavering belief that they can do that, I think even from an inner game point of view, that is probably even necessary, that they themselves do believe that.
Yeah. And I know a lot of those power hypnotists, I don't know, I might be making this up, but I think they're actually threatened by any kind of inquiry into something else that might be going on other than their rigid belief system, because they don't want their reality to shatter, because they need that in order to be the hypnotist that they are.
Yeah.
So they can't question and can't necessarily explore. Now, I don't want to draw any judgment around that. If that's the way it needs to be for them, that's fine. However, that particular type of hypnotist isn't one I'm going to enjoy having a discussion about hypnosis with.
True. Very true. Right. I think we've covered a lot. I think a lot of the stuff that is now going to go into this one last question has already been covered, but I'm still going to ask it because it's what it probably boils down to. And perhaps you have a synopsis, perhaps you have the essence to that answer. What makes a successful and effective hypnotist for you?
If I come back down once again and strip it down to that definition of the use of language and communication to direct attention and seed ideas for the purpose of altering a person's perception of reality, a successful hypnotist for me is a person who is successful at leading people into those altered perceptions of reality. And the more successful they are at doing that, in the greater number of contexts and with the greatest number of people, the better they are as hypnotists, really. And I think there's a path of mastery, what I often call a path of mastery, not a path to mastery. Because I don't think mastery is a destination that you ever really reach. I think there's always another level that you can take things to. And it's just staying on the path that makes you a kind of master in many ways, if you even if there is such a thing as a master.
Yeah.
But I think that's it. And it's always being willing to change up your frames, to explore something new, to go, how can I take this to the next level? Where can I go next that's going to enable me to get better results yet in guiding people into these useful places? And that's what it's about for me. And I see it in the context of life. So I talk about reality shaping a lot. And I never introduced myself as a reality shaper, but on my jamestripp.co.uk website, which is a junk pile website, really, but the tagline on that is James Tripp, reality shaper and people developer. Forgive me, my phone has gone off. Reality shaper and people developer. So, because I think about this in terms of life. Where am I going? I do things all the time. I like to get my restaurant order changed and this sort of thing, almost arbitrarily, just as a opportunity to practice what you might call hypnotic influence. I might want to get little things, like I was in a burger restaurant the other day and they wanted to charge me £1 to have barbecue sauce. And I wanted to get the barbecue sauce without paying the £1. Not because I didn't have the £1 or it was going to break the bank. It's just a little, here's an opportunity. So, I think for me, what makes a great hypnotist, a really great hypnotist, is somebody who can take hypnosis outside of the formal context of hypnosis. They take people into different realities, into different perspectives, but they can do so anytime, any place, anywhere. And sometimes it might look like hypnosis and it might be obvious. And other times it might not look like anything more than a standard interaction or conversation. And that for me is the thing. Because I think to be a reality shaper, it happens on two levels. There's first of all how you shape your own reality, how you interact with your own material, how you influence yourself. But there's also how you influence the world around you, and those two things come together. And I think that when the art of doing that, is the art of being a truly great hypnotist.
Right. I think that's a beautiful thing to bring it down to, because, let's leave the discussion with that beautiful idea of taking it outside of hypnosis and growing with it and, looking at how it actually applies to real life at any given moment.
Yeah.
James, I want to thank you so much for sharing the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. I always enjoy chatting about this kind of thing.
That is a good thing. If now someone says, wow, this James Tripp really makes a lot of sense to me, I want to broaden my knowledge and skills and suck the merit of life out of his brain, which I totally encourage, because I'm not the the be-all and end-all of hypnosis, not even to my students. What can I tell them, or what do you want to tell them? Is there a chance to pick your brain at some point or go on a course of James Tripp's?
Yeah, I have various courses coming up at various points. My best recommendation to those listening to this who want to find out more is to visit www.hypnosiswithouttrance.com. And you can sign up there. There's a free members area, which I've got tons of videos in, teaching hypnosis, and particularly the hypnosis without trance approach, for free.
Which I can highly recommend, because even if you're doing hypnosis with trance, understanding what lies beneath it and perhaps even being able to do it without, I think, makes you way more flexible and solid a hypnotist. So, yeah.
And in many ways, it's just about hypnosis. I've got stuff, I think, in there. At least I've got one video talking about rapid induction rituals and use of induction as ritual and that kind of thing that we discussed here. So, go there, find out what's going on there. And from time to time, I post information about courses. And if you're on the mailing list there, I'm not a great spammer. I don't send relentless emails. I just send an email when there's something new on the blog, when there's a new video up. And that's the best I can recommend for that.
Beautiful. All right. Then, I would say once again, thank you a lot for being here and having this chat. And I think we all can take a lot out of this discussion. I think it's one that I will have to listen to again and again with a note and pen in hand, and I hope any of the listeners will do so as well. James, I wish you a great evening, and hope to see you soon again.
Indeed, yes. Thank you for having me.
I'm sure we soon will.
Okay.
Have a great evening.